gratefully thank Max for very quickly loading our presentation up. So let's get started. A little bit of introduction about the two of us. I am at the University of Albany, where I got my master's in atmospheric science a long time ago. I am the IT person for our department. Among other things, I deploy the Jupyter Hub with Pangeo scientific software stack, and I also teach 2 classes on Python using the Pangeo stack, and also train students on using GitHub to contribute to open source projects. And I'll let Drew say hello.
And my name is Drew Camron. My day job is at Unidata, where I am very lucky to get to work as a maintainer on MetPy and some of our adjacent meteorological data Python tools and packages, and educating people on using Python in the geosciences. So thanks for having us here today.
And besides background in atmospheric science, Drew and I also share some developers that help us out at home. We've got some cats here. Some are a bit more code-oriented than others. So it looks like Sophia and Stormy are definitely engaged in the coding. And the others are kind of resting. No doubt they're probably waiting for a Conda installation to proceed because they haven't updated to Mamba yet. Okay, so what are some of the, I'm sure we've all run into this, but what are some of the signs that an open source project, in this case following the metaphor of a home and garden, might need a little bit of TLC? I'm going to talk about an experience that really just happened to me. One of the things that I do in my role at the department is every academic year I roll out a new Jupyter Hub environment and kind of have a long laundry list of packages that I add to an environment. And every now and then, there will be a package or 3 that is no longer in a state of being maintained, so I can't successfully install it into my environment. So you get a trace back on your Mamba install that kind of looks like this. We also, no doubt, have had some favorite packages and GitHub projects that we follow that might look a little bit like this anonymized snapshot. Here we see that the last activity on the project was several years ago. Clearly no signs of further growth in that open source garden. A community garden needs a community working with it. So I'll throw myself under the bus here just for a toy example. This was actually, I think, the very first GitHub repository that I set up. The only thing I want to communicate to you here is that this is a particular package, if you will, where there's only one person working on it. That is more likely than not to lead to problems in getting the ecosystem sustained. So several possible ways that a free and open source software system might undergo decay. Many of these, I think, kind of work in tandem with others. If you don't have good documentation, if you don't have a good on-ramp for people who are interested using the project to participate, chances are your particular plot in the garden is going to have some time developing. It'll have a problem developing as you would like it. One example of a community that I think is exemplary in how it is sustaining a very fruitful garden is the Pangeo software stack. And more than just a stack, it is a community. You've seen this graphic before, one of many that display the software ecosystem that makes up Pangeo. But it is more than just software. It is a community as well. There are 4 aspects to the community engagement that Pangeo brings forth. There's a discourse channel, There are weekly Pangeo meetups where anyone is invited to participate during the academic year. There are showcase presentations where someone, whether they're an advanced scientist or a student, will present 10 or 15 minutes showing some cool stuff they are doing with the Pangeo ecosystem and beyond. Also have listed a couple of projects under the auspices of Pangeo, the PyArt Radar project, and besides, there's of course always ways with social media to engage. So I have a sample tweet here from MetPy, who maybe many of you saw at Ryan May's talk in this session yesterday. So one thing that Pangeo strove for in the beginning was, we have all these great tools, we've got a community, how can we bring people into the community and educate them on how to use the stack? And so that formed the basis for the Project Pythia effort. We were funded in 2020. The website, projectpythia.org, has several components I'll briefly talk about here. One is foundational material we consider to be the gateway to working with the scientific software ecosystem. We have lessons on how to use Jupyter, how to participate with Git and GitHub, and then we have several Jupyter books, executable notebooks, that go through several core packages in the Pangeo software stack. We also have a curated gallery of external resources that we have available. And some of the biggest effort that we've been putting into in the last year or so are what we call cookbooks, where someone may have a particular project, something that they're interested in, perhaps a workflow that uses the Pangeo stack. This is a way that anyone in the community can publish their workflow and thus contribute back to the project. So I'm going to turn things over to Drew, and he's going to actually talk about how a particular contribution might evolve from seedling to beautiful tree.
Thank you, Kevin. So yeah, from this sort of multi-component perspective, how does Project Pythia tend to its garden of community? How does it put effort into the important technical pieces that make people's lives and work easier? How does it teach and train people to use the actual Pangeo stack, as well as teach and train people how to contribute and be a part of that software community? And then how does Pythia itself tend to its community, invest in the people that care about this work, and make sure they are able to participate in a way that elevates the work that they do and that sees their hard work get supported in this community. Importantly, Pythia can't do this passively. This can't be done by only just reducing barriers, just making things easier. Something can be as easy as possible to do, and no one might want to do it, even so. So all of these components require active participation and active investment from the project and from its community members. So the order here of these things I'm going to step through isn't necessarily important. Just know that if I'm a new contributor in the Project Pythia space, there are multiple steps and ways that I'm going to interface with the project, each with its own barriers, headaches, and successes. And let's take a look at what each of them looks like, what people might have to go through to sort of really invest their time and work into the Pangeo community and into Project Pythia. So we'll talk a bit about cookbooks, about what it might look like to create your own cookbook and have it be this sort of living geoscientific Python workflow in the space. And the things that we as an existing community and a growing community do well or maybe don't do so well along the way to seeing that to completion. So here in our community garden, if we bring it all the way back to the metaphor, the sort of first place you might have someone start when it comes to a community garden is the desire to garden, is an idea of something they want to contribute to the geoscientific Python space. Maybe this comes with a class you've taught, a class you've taken, with part of your job, part of the work you do. Maybe it comes with code you already have. Maybe it comes with code you want to write. Maybe it comes with no code at all. But you have an idea of how you want to share exciting Python and Python adjacent work with your community and with our community, and as those overlap. The ways that we sort of help people here before they've even started writing their own cookbooks are through some educational material to on-ramp people to Python at all in our space and our niche. So we have this, as Kevin talked, foundations piece of Project Pythia that sort of catches people up and gets people to a level playing field when it comes to concrete code, when it comes to Python and the geosciences and using the Pangeo stack. Also with an idea, almost regardless of this technical piece, we try and create space. We try and create a literal space and say discourse or in our meetings where people can bring ideas, ask for feedback, and ask questions, as well as in the figurative sense, make space and leave room for people to speak and to speak up safely in these spaces and start to talk about their ideas for contribution. So with an idea, at least in this particular workflow, and yes, sort of some of the ways that we make this present. The next way that someone might interact with our project is with a conversation. So in these spaces, whether you already have code, whether you already have notebooks you want to elevate or not, you need to find out what to do. You know this Project Pythia thing exists, you know it's a space that you could participate in, but you have no idea who's responsible for it, you have no idea what your options for participation are. So you need to start a conversation, which itself is scary regardless of where you go, but starting a conversation with people you may or may not know can be a lot. Starting a conversation in this space needs to be open and accessible, but something we also try to be cognizant of is that within these, again, literal and figurative spaces we create, if there is some sense of an enclosed community, if this is a thing that is Project Pythia, then we also create room for people to feel like they belong to something when they come to start these conversations. You aren't just, say, exchanging a Twitter DM with one person. You are in the Project Pythia space. We don't ever want that space to be exclusive to new people, meaning that because the space exists, it's hard to go, break the door down and join. But we want it to have an identity so that when you participate, you feel like you're part of something. So this requires the usual balances of being open, but also safe, but also et cetera, et cetera. This is something we are still actively working on, and so if people have suggestions for new places and spaces for people to start conversations about the work they want to do in a safe way, let us know. There are things we have not yet considered. Okay, so let's go a little bit into code. If, say, you do want to join this garden and contribute to it concretely through some code or code-adjacent material, some learning materials about code, what do we provide to make your life in that space a little smoother? So back to our community garden metaphor, we provide or you bring along some plant starts in the plot that we have provided for you. These plant starts might be individual disparate notebooks. They might be just continuations of your previous idea we talked about before, but you know that you want to sort of combine and turn these into something that demonstrates something meaningful to your community or teaches somebody something in the space. So the technical aspect of this sort of stage of the contribution process that we provide things like templates. We provide things that are sort of pre-populated in a helpful way so that when you want to do this sort of work, you are not starting from zero. You're not starting from nothing. We provide, of course, a variety of sort of this foundational material, this asynchronous training and educational piece we talked about before, as well as synchronous events and hackathons, workshops, and a variety of open meeting times to sort of discuss how do I go from a Jupyter notebook to a cookbook of many, showing off some cool workflow to my people. We provide a variety of guides, contributors' guides, documentation to hopefully allow people to explore these on their own time if they're not able to participate in our more synchronous spaces. And then we still have these discussion spaces where you can get support or help along the way. And so at this point in the process, we hope that what you've gotten to is a Jupyter book. So for people that have come to us with just individual notebooks they're working in, how do I combine those into one piece of technology? Maybe I don't have it out visible on the internet just yet, but I have some organized piece of multimedia and code, and now I have an idea of where I can take this next to elevate it. And so at this point, we try and take someone's idea, we've connected with them, help them put it into, in this case, a Jupyter book. Then we, as we step along here, you can see some of the pieces and parts of what we provide that sort of grease these wheels. But what we want to actually turn these into are Pythia Cookbooks. This Jupyter book, this sort of multimedia learning and education or reproducible workflow piece that lives somewhere on the internet, like that you can point someone to, even if they are not at all engaged in the Pythia space, just a URL with the relevant scientific workflow that you want to take a look at or the cool piece of learning and training that you want to share. So how do we get people from collection of code, from Jupyter notebooks, even from a Jupyter book that's been assembled, to this thing that lives and breathes and has people invested in it on the internet? This is one of our most developed and engaged cookbooks in the space, by the way. We can drop some links after the presentation. So what does it take to get to a cookbook? In this case, we have to go back to sort of my original intro slide to this section, and we really have to address all three pieces of community growth, this sort of technical, communal, and educational piece, or these separate pieces, to elevate something from just notebooks or a Jupyter book all the way to a cookbook. And the ways we do this, GitHub, that provides a lot of these pieces separately, and people are already familiar with GitHub when it comes to iterating on code with pull requests, when it comes to discussion and issue spaces, when it comes to technical support, when it comes to documentation. People are already familiar with GitHub, and so this is something we can really take advantage of in our space. And as part of that, we provide a ton of sort of relevant GitHub actions out of the box, again, so you don't have to start from zero, that will do a lot of the testing, the code sort of health checking for you, even if you've never done that before, even if you've never worked with CI, etc. It will publish your cookbook for you so that you have a place on the internet that it lives. And we have some citation infrastructure to make sure you get credit and you can shout out to people, hey, here concretely is the work I've been doing. We also provide for people something that may potentially help their Jupyter book go from, you know, a page on the internet to something people can play with, interact with, and use for work through, you know, sort of deployments on Jupyter hubs via BinderHub or a few other services as part of this actions infrastructure. Then in the sort of community aspect, what cookbooks have right now is interest, is engagement from invested people. So right now, cookbooks are sort of a program and a space that has a variety of people, regardless of the specific work they're doing, interested and supportive. And when you elevate your collection of code, your multimedia learning, to something like a cookbook, you sort of get access to this energy and to all these people that are doing similar exciting work. This is, while it has been a place of some of our most rapid growth as a project, it is a place where we also still have so much of our growth left to do. There's a lot of processes here that are still confusing to folks. Like, is this, you know, an academic space? Is there a review component? Can anyone participate? What is the process for developing materials, for having new voices come and update existing cookbooks? And how do I get technical support along the way as a contributor? And how do people get technical support for using my material or for participating in my cookbook moving forward? And these are things we have ideas for, But if you have experience in the space, please reach out to us. What this looks like for sure to a lot of folks that may be brand new in the geosciences space are ideally a large suite of lovely green check marks on GitHub. But hopefully the tools to not panic if they're not all beautiful and green. But this sort of collection of infrastructure and tools to, again, have people not starting from zero when it comes to sharing geoscientific code across the internet. A piece we really like to highlight in this space is credit, is acknowledgement. I know that in some ways, especially in academia, this piece can be frustrating, especially to many professionals, but we want concretely that if someone comes and creates a cookbook or even contributes to an existing cookbook, they get sort of shouted out. Not everyone is the new gardener of the year, but it feels good to be acknowledged, especially if you're new in a space or you're new to trying something. And so as part of our infrastructure piece and as part of our drive as a community, we absolutely want to emphasize this sort of credit piece. What this looks like on many published cookbooks are sort of automated generation of contributors that go through GitHub, as well as sort of a more qualitative way to describe, hey, me or this team were the first people that came along and sort of started this through this sort of author space as well. Okay. Wrapping up this sort of journey as a contributor in Project Pythia, things we do well. At the end of creating your first cookbook, we genuinely hope that the most important thing people leave with is a place to be, is a sense of community, is like, I did this thing with these people and I got something out of it and it felt good. I want to come back and do it again. I want to come back and help out other people. I am invested in the goals of this project. We try and do this partially by, for one, tasking cookbook contributors to own their thing, to own their cookbook and stick around and continue to maintain it and support it and keep it relevant for new students, for new participants moving forward. We do this without leaving people to drown, ideally. We try and provide connections between people working on similar things, or just a general sense of like, hey, that looks kind of complicated, but other people hear you and can try and find you some support along the way. And then we try and encourage a sort of mentality that everything we're working on lives and exists to evolve and to change. So like any one workflow will hopefully be like the way to do radar data in Python, even if the way to do radar data in Python changes, and we keep people invested in having these be relevant. So some takeaways from our sort of contributor life cycle. Doing this is hard. Being a contributor takes work, and being the people sort of investing in contributors takes work. It requires a lot of sort of nuance and active participation on top of people's already very busy lives, and it requires a lot of, for as cheesy or buzzwordy as this is, a lot of agility in terms of, you have to respond quickly, you have to respond empathetically, and you have to be invested in what you're creating along the way. But with that investment comes, honest to goodness, a lot of fulfillment. Like when you see any one person see something like this through to completion, or any group of people express interest at all at any step in this process, it's really rewarding. And as a new contributor, if you yourself can find that success, we hear a lot about how rewarding it is for people to participate in this space. So I'm going to hand it back to Kevin to let you know about some of Pythia's next steps and to wrap up our presentation.
Thanks, Drew. Just got a minute or so I think I'm just going to quickly summarize. We have some technical challenges going forth as more people join the ecosystem, join our community, and contribute cookbooks. We're going to need some more infrastructure, so we're looking to power up our Binder Hub that makes our cookbooks and foundational material shareable and interactive for anyone who wishes to use it. And we've gotten a lot of nice ideas from some of the talks this week. Part of community building is more than just software. It's it's adopting proven methods that some of the organizations like Chaos that I didn't know about until yesterday's lunchtime keynote need to adopt that into our workflow. We invite all of you to participate in Project Pythia. Hopefully, a talk like this, it may be hard for some of the material that we're showing to stick. We do have some stickers with our URL to deal with that, so please pick that up. And the one thing I'll also highlight is that we have an annual hackathon. We just had one in June that had about 40 participants, so we're talking about 30 or so folks who are outside the core group, and we're actively planning next year's hackathon, which we hope will be even bigger and better. Thanks so much, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thanks for an excellent talk. Sorry, I guess I'm causing audio problems too. Yeah, so I was, I guess, two questions. So it was cool on slide 20. You were talking about how you have these different GitHub actions and additional things to try and make it easier for the community. Is this something that is specific enough to the to like your community that's a bit too tailored, or could this be generalized enough that it could maybe be moved over to the Scientific Python org in a similar way to how like Cookie moved from like scikit-hep to Scientific Python? And then kind of a follow-up, I also was thrilled to see that you have citation.cff files in your project template, so wonderful to see. And do you also have, well, you can't have like a static file in there. Do you also encourage people to use Zenodo for long-term preservation?
So if I can answer for your first question, no, this is not so specific that it couldn't exist more generally for folks. And in fact, there is sort of a soft goal. Of course, that takes sort of secondary priority to making it work in sort of Pangeo right now, given the busyness of people. But for many of these things, the goal really is probably for a lot of them to end up in Jupyter Book, to end up sort of back up into that project. For your second question, part of our current infrastructure, this is very fresh, like out of the hackathon mere weeks ago, but we're currently using citation.cff to generate Zenodo DOIs for each cookbook so that as people participate, they have this concrete thing to refer back to. So absolutely. Thanks for the question.
Do we have any other questions?
That's great, thank you. That was a great talk. I think what you're doing is really important, so thanks for all your efforts there. Just as a curiosity, if you've got someone who comes along and gives you a cookbook, to educate some of the community, do you have like a governance model, or how do you ensure that those cookbooks are maintained themselves and kept up to date?
I mean, we have a contributor's guide that basically takes through the steps to make it a Pythia cookbook. So we try to make it, in our contributor's guide for cookbooks, we try to make it as easy to follow. You should be able to just follow the steps, but as Drew said, I mean, we're there to help you every step of the way. So we can turn your content that you've developed notebooks for, maybe even a Jupyter book, and I think quite nimbly turn it into something that will be available on a central cookbook repository that everyone can access.
All right, do we have any further?
And I, really quick, just want to add to your previous question. Right now, the requirement that we expect of anything to be called a cookbook is as low as possible. Right now, we are trying to encourage as much participation as possible, and so we are trying to require as little sort of review other than making sure, it's not just problematic, but as little review to sort of welcome something as a cookbook, for sure. But we are thinking about what that looks like moving forward.
So yeah, thanks very much. This is a really, really nice talk. So I'm from the SciPy project, and we're thinking about a lot of basically the exact same stuff. And we've debated, doing this kind of cookbook idea a lot recently. What we found is that it's often really hard to get scientists to engage with our community in terms of engaging directly with the code, because it's a higher barrier to entry. Have you found that it's easier to get users to engage with something that's more close to their science, like a cookbook?
So I think in some ways we're a little lucky. Maybe I'll let Kevin talk about this a bit more. That a lot of our scientists, specifically in sort of weather and climate and oceanography, are already excited about interfacing with the code, and it's almost motivating too many of them to be able to interact in that way. We do see some barriers in sort of finding more entrenched scientists to want to dig up the work they're doing and offer it in this way. And maybe I'll let Kevin talk about your experience with getting people excited to work with.
Well, one thing that I'm planning to do this fall semester is, now that we've gotten our cookbook infrastructure working well, I'm going to have all the students put together a project. So I think there we'll get some nice feedback from someone who maybe is kind of new, not only to the domain science, but also to the whole Python and GitHub-centric ecosystem. So, as Drew said, I think now we've been lucky to have folks who I think are pretty advanced. A nice test coming up is going to be, how can we easily on-ramp people who are coming from less experience?
All right, we are at time, so if you do have any further questions, please cast them in the hallway, and let's thank our speakers again.